The Farseer Trilogy in 2025. A few weeks ago, I finished Assassin's Quest, which is book 3 in Robin Hobb's first series of her Realm of the Elderlings universe. I wanted to talk about my thoughts on the series as a whole and whether it holds up with regards to modern fantasy. This video will be spoiler free. First, a synopsis on the trilogy. I just finished LIVESHIP Trader's book 2, which is the second series in the Realm of the Elderlings, so it takes place, I think, directly after Farseer. And as I finished it, as I closed it, I saw there was a really good short description of the plot for this, so let me just read it. Young Fitz is a bastard son of a royal house, raised at the court by his grandfather's gruff stableman and ignored by all but his devious grandfather, who has secretly trained him in the arts of the assassin. He hopes to turn Fitz into a tool of the king rather than a helpless pawn in the line of succession who can be used by the most ruthless contenders. But Fitz is far from either a pawn or a tool. He carries an ancient magic in his blood, and as barbarous raiders ravage his lands, he's growing to manhood in a world which becomes more uncertain by the day. Soon he must face his first dangerous soul-shattering mission and learn that not only is he a threat to the throne, but he may also well be its only hope for survival. Okay, this is more a description of book 1, it looks like. Man, that's for the whole series. Kind of sums it up pretty well. Now let's talk about the series. I'm gonna separate this into 3 categories: writing style, characters, and plot. To start off with writing style, this is probably the oldest fantasy series I've ever read. Fantasy specifically, which isn't saying much since it only came out in the 90s, but I feel like when it comes to fantasy as we know it, this is old. Lord of the Rings is ancient, and then there's actual ancient, which is like the Odyssey. Interesting. It's not modern, but it is, but it's not. You know what I mean? Either this is just Robin Hobb's prose specifically, but the way it reads reminds me of something I would read as a classic when I was in English class growing up. Her prose is beautiful in a way that I think is rare in modern fantasy. Not to say that all modern fantasy authors are unfamiliar with the dictionary, but I do think a lot of the time they just kind of like tell it like it is, which is just to say the prose is more plain, more blunt. Now, I don't really ever mention prose in these videos because at the end of the day, as long as it isn't distracting, I don't really care. However, when reading this book, the writing style actually makes it feel old. It felt like I was transported back in time. I won't lie, I was caught off guard at first because of how different it was from modern fantasy I'm used to reading. The last time I was caught this off guard was when I was reading Gideon the Ninth, but that was different because it did feel modern. Tamsin Weir just uses words that are not commonly used in the English language. But when compared to all these books, the difference in writing styles is just insanely different. It reminded me a little bit of 1984, not to say or imply that they're anywhere close to the same, but the prose of Hobb and Orwell is way closer than, say, Hobb and Sanderson, or Hobb and R.F. Kuang, or Hobb and John Gwynne. Like I said, Robin Hobb's prose caught me off guard, but I got used to it really quickly and learned to love it. I like the old feel it gives. Like I said again, makes me feel like I was transported back in time. I'm currently on Ship of Destiny, which is book 3 in LIVESHIP Traders, and her prose still gives the same vibes. I think it's better now, but to me, that's just a natural part of evolution as an author continues to write. Her writing style really helps with the immersion of these books. Obviously, these books are fantasy and take place in a time period when technology is far behind ours. So having the books read the way they do definitely helps you feel like you're a part of the world and plot, and really lets you believe that you are watching things unfold from inside Fitz chivalry. The same thing can be said about the dialogue of the characters. It feels really old, and I love it. I feel like it's rarer these days for authors to commit to having dialogue feel not modern when it comes to fantasy book characters. Obviously, not everyone, like John Gwynne's an example in his Bloodsworn trilogy. So not everybody, obviously. This writing style, I think, definitely holds up. Even though it's not modern, it holds up because it's good. But just because something isn't modern doesn't mean it doesn't hold up, if that makes sense. Next are the characters. Robin Hobb writes character-driven books. I would go as far as to say that the characters are the best part. I've said this time and time again, characters make or break a book. The characters of the Farseer Trilogy are chef's kiss. I really don't have anything bad to say about them. I kind of think they're all perfect. They're all so full of life, so full of flaws, and to me that's what really makes or breaks a character. Their flaws, and boy does our cast have them. The interactions and dynamics between Fitz and the rest of the cast are so good, complex, and they're like ever evolving, ever changing. There isn't really much else I could think of. The characters are just amazing. They absolutely hold up in 2025. The best part of the series, 100%. Now onto the plot. Pretty much all the gripes I have with this trilogy come down to the external plot. Books that lean heavily towards the characters and not as much towards the plot always seem to struggle with the first book. Being attached to the characters takes some time to develop, And if there is a weak amount of external plot in the beginning, then it can become a slog in my opinion. And it was. At least for me. For most of books 1 and 2, we follow Fitz just kind of living his life and dealing with shit as it comes up. Not really my favorite way to do external plot, but I don't really hate it. And it makes it hard to read when you're not super attached to the characters yet. Mostly that part is in reference to book 1, like the first half of book 1. I think on a reread, I would enjoy this more because now I know why everything is happening. If you're reading for the first time, it can feel like you're kind of just hopping around to random ass shit. So I guess the external plot is there when you look back in hindsight. But a lot of it really is Fitz just living his life in Buckkeep, which is fine. It's just kind of boring sometimes. I liked book 3 a lot because of how much the world expanded and how much more external plot there was, along with our lovable cast of characters. I feel like it's becoming a trend in modern fantasy to kind of do the opposite. All external plot and not zero characters, but just weak-ish characters. The first example that pops into mind is James Islington and The Will of the Many specifically, along with The Shadow of What Was Lost. The Will of the Many less so than The Shadow of What Was Lost, but I think James Islington really struggles with this issue. But as we all know, The Will of the Many has popped off. Most of my gripes are with the main character Viss, not really the side cast, but it's still a problem. Another example is Red Rising. I think it's another similar situation with The Will of the Many where our main character Darrow is kind of like kind of boring. The side cast is great, I think. You know what I mean? Yeah, he aura farms, but that's like it. I think John Gwynn's Faithful and the Fallen also struggles with this as well, but with a wider cast of characters. I'll admit I was addicted to those when reading them, but looking back at it, I think his characters could have used more flaws. Those were some very externally plot-driven books for sure. I think this is also the case with YA fantasy that has been popping off like crazy in the last few years as well. But Farseer isn't YA. Or maybe it is actually. I'm gonna have to ponder that one. It's definitely a coming-of-age story told in the first person, which I feel like is very common in YA books, but it doesn't read like YA, like not even close. So maybe it's not. I don't know. Like I said earlier, book 1 can be kind of boring at times, especially because you're not attached to the characters yet. Book 2 is kind of similar when it comes to the external plot, but it's way better in my opinion because of how attached you will be to the characters. And then book 3 is a lot of external plot. I personally like book 2 the most. Anyway, as to whether this holds up to modern standards, it depends. Like I said earlier, the trend right now in fantasy seems to be leaning towards external plot over characters. So I guess if you only look at it from that angle, I guess you could say it doesn't hold up. But just because that is a trend, and I could be wrong about that even being a trend, doesn't mean it's a good trend. It's good. You know, Joe Abercrombie is a character man first and foremost, and his books still do really well. So obviously that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't succeed as a character-driven freaking warrior. And Robin clearly has succeeded as a character-driven warrior. But I'm a big character guy. So in my opinion, as long as I'm attached to the characters, I don't really care too much about the external plot, unless it's like really stupid. But just because the external plot is a little weak doesn't make it bad. It probably just needs more protein. You know what I mean? The external plot in this series will definitely shine through on a reread. The reread, I think, is the protein it needs. As I've said, I'm reading LIVESHIP Traders right now. I'm almost done with it. And I think I like it more than Farseer because there is just as much, if not more, character work than Farseer, but there's also crazy amounts of external plot too. I think she's really cooking with this series. Overall, when it comes to the entire trilogy, I would say it absolutely holds up in 2025. This is a classic for a reason. Even with me not caring too much for the external plot in books 1 and 2, I was so attached to the characters, it didn't even matter. For me, this series is a 5-star read and a series that I'm excited to reread, and I think will only be better once I do. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. If you guys like this video, like, subscribe, check out my wish list, check out my sponsor, follow all my socials in the description. And yeah, we'll see you next time.